Movie Nut here with a review for Pearl Harbor, the 2001 action film based on the real-life historical event starring Ben Affleck and Kate Beckinsale. Set during the 1940s, Pearl Harbor follows the story of two young pilots, Rafe and Danny, who become Army Air Corps pilots and meet Evelyn, a nurse for the Navy. Eventually, Rafe falls heads over heels for her, and of course, the two fall in love. However, during a mission, Rafe is killed, and Danny becomes Evelyn's new, interest. However, later on, while on duty at Pearl Harbor during the time of the famous attack, Rafe returns from the dead, and as such, feud between the two former best friends begins, set during the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese Empire. The acting all around is average. Yes, the cast is filled with many familiar names like Ben Affleck, Kate Beckinsale, Alec Baldwin, and Cuba Gooding Jr., but they don't really get much in the way of anything interesting to say or do. Really, they're just there to fill in the stereotypical roles that you'd expect in a war movie like this. That's not to say that the performances are terrible, it's just that nothing is very interesting about any of these characters. None of them really have any arcs or developments. Things just happen. Affleck and Beckinsale do have some chemistry, however, it's not the strongest ever. And though she pulls off a decent accent, the fact that Kate Beckinsale is being forced into this awkward love triangle kind of demutes her character. But of course, I'll get into that later when we talk about the script. And as I said, the rest of the cast do average jobs. As I said, you got pros in here like Alec Baldwin and Cuba Gooding Jr., but they're never given enough to do anything interesting. They're just relegated to bit parts as captains and sailors. And of course, as this is about Pearl Harbor, there are obviously all the politicians and the president and all these other generals and cast of characters who are obviously behind obviously the title of the movie is Pearl Harbor, so the ones politicking the whole events that led to Pearl Harbor. However, none of them are given much interesting to say or do. They're just there to spout exposition. They don't really have much in the way of a personality except to just say, well, we're gonna bomb Pearl Harbor, blah 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 blah. And the Japanese themselves are they're ridiculously stereotyped. Or most of them wear black, and some of them are older men with black sunglasses, because all Japanese men are older and have sunglasses, and they are very cliched and stereotyped, even though their performances are not horrible. But again, we'll get into the whole thing later. Now, as this is a Michael Bay film, of course we know what the highlight is: the action and the explosions and the special effects. And I will say that the big battle at Pearl Harbor is pretty good. It's plenty of nice wide shots, so we see the destruction, the explosions are nice and big, and very little CG is used. So that's always a plus. And even though the characters don't get much development, you really do see and feel their pain as they see their whole world being destroyed around them by the Japanese. And the music by Hans Zimmer and Klaus Baldet, while not memorable, does its job and makes the scene all that much more epic and exciting, which of course makes sense, considering what event this is. And of course, the locations and cinematography are pretty good and do recreate the look of a classic 40s war movie, so props to Bay for making this film look like the period and for feeling like a movie that could have come from the period. However, as with most Michael Bay movies, the looks are where the positives end. The script here is dreadful. I mean, it's not the worst thing ever, it's certainly not Island of Dr. Moreau, but it is atrocious for one big reason. The movie is called Pearl Harbor, not Love Triangle of the 1940s. I'm dead serious, people. 2/3 of this movie, in fact 2.5 of this movie, are nothing but the love triangle between Rafe, Evelyn, and Danny. Literally, very little time is spent. It isn't until the halfway through that we finally get to Pearl Harbor. The first part of the movie is just them going around, obviously random American locations, and Rafe going to England, and just all this generic stuff. And as I said, even though it looks good, it's just really irritating because you know that the big battle at Pearl Harbor is going to be epic, but it forces you to trudge through all this boring exposition. And the thing is, though there is some chemistry, the three don't make a very good love triangle because the dialogue is so badly wooden and cliched. I mean, yeah, people like to laugh at the 40s war movies for having cliched dialogue, but there it works because it complemented the whole feel of the era. But this is not the 1940s, people. This movie was made in 2001. So by now, writers should be able to give characters natural dialogue. And what's worse is that the whole politicking that, in and of itself could have made a great movie of the Americans and the Japanese, and all the backstabbing that went on is relegated to just 3-minute scenes, literally. For every 10 minutes that you see the couple, there's like 1 or 2 minutes of the politicians. And that is a great shame because it feels so forced into the background. And the thing is, this movie is called Pearl Harbor. You'd think that they focus on what matters, which is learning why the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Why did they backstab the Americans? There's so much meat in that concept alone, and they just blow it because they do a very uninteresting, very boring love triangle. In fact, the great example of how to do a good Pearl Harbor movie is a film from 1970 called Tora, 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 directed by Richard Fleischer, who also did Soylent Green and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. There, the film focuses on the politicians, and it's a brilliant film. It moves at a good pace, and while the final fight scene obviously isn't as epic as Pearl Harbor, it does its job. And the thing is, the film focuses on the story of Pearl Harbor. But here, in a movie called Pearl Harbor, very little of the plot has to do with the attacks on Pearl Harbor. The attack on Pearl Harbor really here exists just to make obviously a dramatic third act. Apart from that, it almost feels like you could set this in any other location during World War II and it would have worked just as well. And so in conclusion, I must give Pearl Harbor a plastic star. I'm sorry, but no matter how good that big battle at the end is, it's not worth trudging through a good 2 hours or so of boring exposition, wooden romance, and just really outright disrespect for the people who died at the battle. The fact of the matter is, when you make a film like this, you should take the event seriously and make a film about that. If you want to see a good Pearl Harbor movie, go see Tora, Tora, Tora.